New Guinea, the masks of guardian spirits on the Sepik River. British Columbia, the cannibal birds of the Kwagilth Indians. West Africa, the secret masked society of the Dogon. Once, each tribe inhabited its separate world. Today, the boundaries are disappearing, and European man has crossed them all.
1,500, 800, 3,000, 200, 500, 3,800, 4,000, 4,200, 4,500.
London, Sotheby's auction rooms, and a wooden figure from New Guinea that was once part of a sacred flute.
At £5,500. On my right then, at £5,500.
It's a big, important sale. Dealers and collectors have come from all over Europe and America. On offer are traditional tribal sculptures made by Pacific Islanders, American Indians, and Africans.
It's the first of Fang figures, lot 186. £1,000 bid, £1,000, 1,000, 1,100, 1,200, 1,300, 1,400, 1,500, £1,500, 1,600, 1,700, 1,800, 1,900, 2,000, £2,000 now, 200, 2,400, 600, 2,800, 3,000, 3,200, 400, £3,400, at 3,600, 3,800, 4,200, at £4,200 now on my right, 4,200, 4,500, 4,800, 5,000, 200, 5,500, 800, 6,000, 500, 7,500, 8,500, 9,000, 500, 9,500, 10,000, £10,000. At £10,000, it is the back of the room, 500, 10,000 for 11,000. At £11,000 now, at the back of the room, at £11,000.
Well, it's loving. It's an act of loving.
And she has a bracelet.
The objects sold at Sotheby's will go all over the world, though not one will go back to the people who actually created it. Some will go to wealthy museums, where they will be exhibited not as ethnographic curios, but as important works of art. And some will go to collectors like Lester Wunderman in New York. Over 20 years, he's assembled the most important private collection of Dogon sculpture in the world. For him, these alien objects have a greater fascination than anything produced in New York, America, or Europe.
The first Dogon piece I ever saw stopped me in my tracks. I didn't even know who the Dogon were. And I had seen a lot of painting and seen a lot of art. And I came upon this little piece of carved wood. And it communicated to me in a way that nothing ever had before. And something, it must have taken some part of me, because I became insatiable to know who made it, who carved it, why did they carve it, how did they feel about it. And I began to study about the Dogon, and then I went there, of course. And then I began to look at Dogon sculpture everywhere. And I guess I've seen almost every piece that's available for seeing. And the connection was passionate from the very beginning. What appeals to me is not aesthetics as we understand aesthetics in our art, but the vitality of the sculpture. You can't look at one of these except that you realize that this really has a role in the life of the people and the society. It belongs to them. It comes out from them.
What about that piece? Is that a particularly fine piece, do you think?
Yeah, this is really unique and one of a kind. This, we know of no other Dogon piece exactly like this round body. And of course, these arms used to be complete, but as you can see, the head has been hollowed out by time. It's been eaten by termites, which has stopped now, but that's probably quite old. And the termites had been at it for a long time. Of course, we stopped that, preserve it by having it. In a way, it's one of the answers to people who say, why don't you leave the art in Africa? In the first place, I didn't find this in Africa. Secondly, I think had it stayed in Africa, it would be quite eaten up by now.
The civilized world's appetite for the uncivilized world's art is ravenous. Its demands are even felt in Corrigo village, deep in the heart of New Guinea. These masks of guardian spirits, detached from their costumes of basket work and leaves, are much sought after by collectors. An old one in the sale rooms might easily fetch £300 or £400 or even more. So traders have already been up to Corrigo, and the Corrigo sculptors are now starting for the first time to carve not just for their own use, but for sale. At the moment, they're still carving masks to the old traditional patterns. But already the shrewder among them are beginning to realize that they're working for an uncritical market. In the past, they carved for people who knew the meaning of every symbol, who appreciated the subtleties of the shapes distilled and refined over generations, and who could see when a piece was sloppily conceived or carelessly finished. But few traders can have comparable knowledge or insight. Most are concerned only with quantity. They'll buy all they can get. So why waste time on refinements that the customer can't appreciate? Today in the cult house at Corrigo, where once only half a dozen sacred masks were kept hidden away from prying eyes, 50 or 60 are laid out on the floor, awaiting prospective buyers. The other side of the Pacific, Hawaii. Once this was a Polynesian kingdom, but Europeans have been coming here for 200 years, and the process that is just beginning in New Guinea is here approaching its end.
Mahalo nui lo mai kai. Welcome to Tavernas Polynesian Spectacular. All the songs and dances of Polynesia that you witness tonight on stage have been carefully chosen and largely researched so that everything that is presented is presented in the light that it was first seen.
Hey, hey, ho!
The announcer's claim is a bold one. Guitars and ukuleles didn't come to Polynesia until the 19th century. And the essence of Polynesian dances was originally poetry, to which the dance movements were simply an accompaniment. But poetry is boring to people who don't speak the language, so poetry has disappeared. This particular dance comes from Tahiti. You don't have to be a Polynesian expert to understand this message. But it's all that is left of a rich range of dances that the island once possessed. Some dignified and subtle, some witty, some aggressive and dramatic, all but this one ignored or lost. Hawaii's capital, Honolulu, is a tourist town, one of the holiday centers of the world. Surfing was the sport of the Hawaiian kings, and today's surf enthusiasts flock here to ride the spectacular breakers. Others come to try and catch a glimpse of the Polynesian island paradise that lives in everyone's imagination. And there are plenty of people to cater for them. Hawaiian tiki charms, although tikis are Maori and have nothing to do with Hawaii. Mugs with the grinning fangs of a Hawaiian god, made not in Hawaii, but in the Philippines. Everywhere, you're offered souvenirs with highly authentic-sounding names. They come in all shapes and sizes, lamps, candles, key rings, and this is a bottle opener. And on its back is a label which says, the Hawaiian God of Happiness. He is a cuddly little imp. He loves to be touched. Rub his tummy and it makes him happy, and it makes you happy too. All pure invention by the tourist trade. There never was a God of happiness in ancient Hawaii. And this little plastic knick-knack is what has become of the once terrifying image of Kukailimoku, the great Hawaiian god of war, the eater of land.
Tuna balkana subulqua.
But in some places, people are fighting to preserve their traditions in as pure a form as possible. This dance is being held in Kasan, an Indian village in British Columbia dedicated to the propagation and, where necessary, the resurrection of the arts and skills of the Gitxsan Indians. All kinds of skills are practiced at Kasan. The technique of weaving traditional blankets was totally forgotten. Kasan heard of an enthusiast in Oregon who had worked out how to do it by unraveling one. She gladly passed on her knowledge, and today blankets are once again being woven here. Walter Harris, once a building contractor, decided he wanted to carve. So he consulted an anthropologist who had studied museum pieces and worked out the principles of design intuitively followed by the old sculptors. Now he carves masks and poles which, while they're full of his own invention, still conform to the traditions of his tribe. I asked one of the group who founded Kasan, Polly Sargent, whether you needed to be an Indian to make good Indian sculpture.
People are people. The only thing I do think is that the people have a special feeling for wood. They're good carpenters, 90% of them are good carpenters, and they understand how to handle wood. And of course that's what we have excelled in here, is the wood.
So the fact that the artists who are working here are all Indians is of course deliberate, but not essential.
I don't think so.
Yeah. Why were all these poles and masks carved in the old traditional times? Why were they done?
They were done so a great chief could say, this piece is mine, this land is mine. When he put up his pole, he said, this is my pole, and because on that pole you see the one-horned goat, and the territory in which that one-horned goat was found belongs to me and to my family, and not to you.
Perhaps one of the reasons why Kasan has been so successful is that the things made here are bought not only by white visitors, but by the Indians themselves and used for their original purposes. Old people draw solace from hearing once more the chants of their youth. And the young see in the old dramas a way of recovering their pride in being Indians, a chance of stating their identity in the face of the ways of the whites that threaten to swamp them. The outside world has had little influence on this parched, poor land. This is the southern edge of the Sahara, arid and hostile. Why should any strangers want to come and settle here? Its only inhabitants are the Dogon. Most of their villages are far beyond the reach of roads. They're built entirely of mud, each rectangular flat-roofed house accompanied by a thatched granary. The fact that their sculpture, like their buildings, has remained largely unaffected by the world beyond has made it of particular fascination, and it was to study the art that anthropologist Hans Guggenheim first came here. But he soon became deeply concerned with the problem that dominates the Dogon, drought.
The spot where we are standing now is filled with water at one time of the year. It is inundated, because when we say that there is no water here, what we mean is that the water that comes down during the rainy season in huge downpourings disappears after a very, very short time. When I first heard about the terrifying problem of drought that had struck West Africa as well as the Dogon country, it occurred to me that we would have to look for a solution. And I thought, could one not develop a granary with modern technology that would make it possible for people to store rainwater?
He worked out a way of lining the inside of these granaries with chicken wire, plastered with cement, which would turn them into giant cisterns. And he persuaded the chief of one village to try it. But before work could begin, the gods had to be consulted by means of an oracle. An elaborate grid was drawn in the sand, full of symbolic patterns. During the night, a fox had trotted over it, attracted by small pieces of bait. If his foot had trodden on certain symbols, it could mean that it would be disastrous to start building a water granary.
Ça c'est les greniers d'eau. Oui, ça c'est les greniers d'eau. Ça c'est les greniers d'eau. C'est ça.
Happily, all is well. Custom also demands a sacrifice before the building begins. If such traditions are neglected, the people would certainly have no confidence in the project. Indeed, the builders might not dare to start work for fear of the consequences. The priest goes into the shrine to pray, while blood, the essential libation, soaks into the shrine. So the experimental water granary was built. The village craftsmen understood exactly what was required. The cistern was so sited that rainwater from all the surrounding flat roofs would drain into it, channeled through pipes. But could a granary of mud, lined with no more than cement strengthened with chicken wire, contain such an immense weight of water? Would it not burst? Hans Guggenheim's American experts had assured him that it would hold, but there was still a lot of doubt. The building was topped with a cap of thatch, so that when it was finished, the cistern looked just like a normal granary. And that was particularly important to Hans Guggenheim.
I call this an invisible technology because I wanted to make sure that these granaries would not interrupt the beautiful flow of architecture that we find in Dogon villages. All their life revolves around the granary, their daily activities, their work in the fields, their collecting of millet. If the granary isn't filled with grain, the people starve. And so naturally they try to beautify it and to emphasize the place where grain goes in and where grain goes out. And that is why we have these beautiful Dogon doors that have been carved over centuries. Many of them have been bought up by tourists and foreigners who've come by collectors and are now in the museums. Yeah. But they still try to maintain the tradition. They still attempt to carve locks and to give meaning to these buildings. Mm. And so I felt that it would be important to also have a door carved for this particular granary and for all the granaries, water granaries, that would be built subsequently.
Blacksmiths have supernatural powers and a special relationship with the gods. None but they may carve masks or doors. The local smith, after considerable deliberation, agreed to do the job, and there was much discussion in the village as to what symbols he would decide to carve on a door of a granary that was to contain not millet like any other, but water. Hans Guggenheim believed that this one door could be of great importance to his project. A new technology with potentially huge benefits can, in fact, seriously damage a complex society like the Dogons. If it does violence to the people's view of the universe, if it seems to flout the decrees of the gods, it may either be totally rejected or, if forced upon them, undermine the people's faith and upset their society. Just as he knew it to be essential that the correct consultations and sacrifices were made before work started, so he believed it invaluable for the whole work to be concluded with a piece of carving by the blacksmith. But that in itself could also have an effect on the sculpture he had originally come to study. If the smith produced a new design of door, it could start a new artistic tradition in the village. And it was a new kind of door. Beneath the line of ancestor figures which traditionally stand guard on doors made in this particular village, he had introduced a new element, a frieze that told how this first ever water granary came to be built, how a goat and 2 chickens were taken to the shrine and there sacrificed, and how the fox had trotted over the sand oracle and foretold success. And finally, to give the ultimate proof of the confidence and support of the village, the men of the secret Mask Society came to dance around the new system. 3 months later, the rains came again. The cistern filled to the brim and held. It could be the beginning of a change that could transform their lives, give new impetus to their art, and yet not weaken the traditional structure of their society. There is a desert as harsh and as unfriendly as the Sahara up in the far north, the Arctic, a desert of snow and ice. There, too, men somehow manage to live, and there, too, in conditions so severe that there can be little time for inessentials, they carve. Since they had to carry all their belongings with them on their long journeys over the ice, it's not surprising that their sculptures traditionally were very small. Most of them were of walrus ivory. Here is a little walrus, a seal, a whale, and another seal that's been skinned. But tiny though they are, their form is extremely subtle, and perhaps that comes from the fact that the Eskimos' eyes must be miraculously attuned to the very tiniest variation in shape amongst the ice floes that might betray the presence of a polar bear or a seal that they're hunting. Most are clearly functional. This is an adze, engraved and carved with a mysterious face. And here another one with the figure of a snow owl and two strange figures crouching above it. It seems almost certain that carvings of this kind had some sort of magical purpose. This is a spear straightener in the form of a crouching caribou, and on it engraved lines of caribous and hunters. But some are much more mysterious. These are swimming geese, perhaps, but then some have human faces. And here is a strange seal figure. Perhaps these were counters in some game, or maybe they were part of the apparatus of a magician. Whatever they are, they're part of a tradition which stretches back unbroken for 2,000 years. But then, in the 1950s, things changed. Suddenly, the Eskimos began to carve large, heavy pieces out of stone. And this was the man who brought about that change, Jim Houston. In 1948, a young Canadian artist who was on his first visit to the Arctic, traveling and painting among the Eskimos.
I made a drawing of a person, and the man indicated to me that he wanted it in the Eskimo language, which I did not speak at that time. And so I very reluctantly tore out that page of drawing and gave it to him. And a little while later, he came and opened his hand, and he revealed to me a small caribou, a little stone carving of a caribou with inset ivory eyes, just about that long. But I was absolutely shocked. I mean, it seemed to me to have exactly the feeling of all the ancient things. It had the best qualities of primitivity in it. Later on, that man's name was Naomi Alok, and later on he showed me two others he offered me in exchange for some drawings. And so at that instant I felt, if this is real, if this can go on, unless he's some special kind of genius that I'm unlike other people, there is some sort of a great possibility here. Something could be revealed. And the thrilling part was that this is 1948. I'm not looking at a carving found out of the ground from 3,000 years ago. I'm looking at something made by a man this minute. That's the exciting thing.
A few years later, Eskimos all over the Canadian Arctic were carving. Jim Houston had found for them a new source of income that they desperately needed as they progressively abandoned their old, harsh, wandering life and settled down in villages on the coast. There was nothing like enough walrus ivory to meet the new demand, and the sculptors were forced to use stone and then washed-up bones of whales. Planes flying between the lonely settlements collected the sculptures in ever-increasing quantities and brought them down to this vast warehouse near Ottawa. Here, dealers come to select pieces for the galleries that have sprung up in hundreds in the cities of North America and beyond, some of them selling nothing but Eskimo sculpture. The sheer quantity of the carvings is numbing, the variety of styles enormous. For Houston, the sight is a thrilling one, for it certainly represents a great deal of money that will be flowing back up north. Less certain, perhaps, is the artistic quality of the work.
In all this welter of things, some good, some bad, certain things leap out at you, it seems to me. Here's a whale, a white whale, Killalok, they call it. And it seems to me notable because it has the essence of what he seems to suggest. You see the sort of fatness and the weight of the whale. You see a driving movement, and even the stone, which is a soft green jadeite, has a sort of watery significance to it. You see the shine on his spine and so on. He carves it all around. He keeps after the details. He thinks of the thing in the round. It's a round object. He doesn't just think of it as a thing to set down, and so one view is not important. It's the whole total animal is important.
I don't care for that very much.
Personally, I would love to cut that off, but this seems to have such a virtue in it. It starts off, it seems to orient itself right here, and in this case, the man has decorated the stone in a rather old way by engraving it and cutting into it, but he gets a great sense of driving from the center.
Well, now, the mere fact that you said you'd cut that off Might not the chap up in Cape Dorset or whatever say to the man who's carving this, if I were you, I'd cut that off? And wouldn't that be the European telling the Eskimo what to carve?
Yes, it would. But the man up north is almost in every case not a man, an art man at all. He probably wouldn't. The danger may be that he said, "Would you put that on?"
Well, exactly. But I mean, the mere
Right.
fact that he says anything might mean that the Europeans are changing the way the Eskimos carve.
Yes, I think that's true to some extent.
That change, in some people's eyes, has been very much for the worse. An anthropologist who knows the Eskimo well, Edmund Carpenter, is very critical of the outsiders who have fostered Eskimo art.
They encouraged the Eskimos to make scenes from the past. When the rifle was already in use, now they were showing harpoons in use. And often you'd find that the Eskimos would copy things from catalogs, from mail-order catalogs, and the Canadian government would have to destroy these objects because they didn't want people to feel that this wasn't a native craft, a native art form deeply rooted in belief. Well, of course, it wasn't.
This is a carving that interests me tremendously. This is a shamanistic piece, a big vertebrae of a white whale. Here we see the devil's foot with very pointed claws, unlike a human foot. Everything is in balance and yet sort of out of balance. You see this hand, remarkable. Do you see these faces? The pair of them beautifully and magically in balance. And the keynote of the thing is magic.
That looks, is that a truly traditional
Absolutely.
mermaid?
The one who waves her arms. When the kayakman sees her, he beckons to her and says, "Kylie, Kylie, Kylie," and she answers to him. She's very old in Eskimo mythology and very important, the sea goddess.
The most important figure in Eskimo mythology, everywhere in the north, without exception, is Sedna, or Nuliayuk. And it's a very complicated story of a woman who loses one eye and loses all of her fingers and so forth, and she's unable to comb her hair and so forth. Today, she lives beneath the sea. Today, when the Eskimos carve her, they make her into a mermaid. And they show her with her hair carefully groomed, with fingers, and with 2 eyes. The myth is gone, the whole meaning and story of the thing. And it was the most profound story. I think it was like Orpheus. It was like the Christian story, if you wish. And that's gone. Now it's simply a paperweight. I see the modern Eskimo art as Western. It's designed for Europeans. It has no meaning except financial return for the Eskimos. We've asked them to make art that we like and to make it cheap enough so we can afford it. But we've told them what we want, and they've made it. They've done a very good job. It means that every man can have his own Henry Moore now, in stone. But it's not Eskimo. I really feel there's a basic indignity that cannot ultimately escape having some influence, and it's the indignity of asking people to be other than themselves. Our unwillingness to accept people on their own terms. Our demand that they become like us, consumers in our world, enlarging our market. And then we say they're welcome, but they're not welcome as people who are unique and different. There's no coexistence. You know, to me, art, alien art, becomes really exciting when it forces you to go beyond your own identity, when it really challenges you, not when it confirms all of your previous convictions, but when it's a very painful experience to try to come to know it and to appreciate something that really lies beyond the scope of the identity that you chose for yourself. Now that to me is education, and it may well be what human relations are about too.
Africa again, this time Nigeria. These figures are also the result of an interaction between European and tribal traditions, but here the result has been very different. These figures were not made to sell to an unknown alien public living far away, but to serve a religion that is founded in the very ground on which they stand. They're part of a strange revolution that has produced something totally new in African art. It all began here in this sacred forest at Oshogbo, one of the holy places of the Yoruba people. This is the ancient shrine dedicated to Oshun, the goddess of fertility and water. And it's supported by these pillars, which traditionally are quite bare. But in 1961, they were falling into disrepair, and Susan Wenger, a Viennese artist who had come to settle in the town, managed to get some money to commission their repair. She engaged 2 of the local builders, and as they worked, suddenly, under their fingers, appeared these strange images. Some are half hidden among the branches and roots of the sacred grove. Some are giant shrines where the people come to worship. Susanne Wenger came here originally just to paint, but she became deeply interested in Yoruba religion, began to worship at the shrines, and soon she was initiated as a priestess of the god of creation. In her studio, she works mostly in batik, a method of painting on cloth with molten wax and colored dyes that originally was developed in the Far East and which she had learned in Vienna. Some of her batiks she sells, but many of them are made for religious purposes and portray the Yoruba gods as she sees them. Working with her are other Yoruba artists. Some of them have taken up the art of batik painting. Nearly all of them carve, and it is their statues that crowd every room in the house. Oshogbo, where she lives, is a small town in the center of Nigeria. She herself is the only European living in the old quarter. Although this place is, by tradition, sacred to the Yoruba, not all the people living there still follow their tribal beliefs. Some are Christian, many are Muslim, and it certainly caused a sensation when Susanne Wenger first settled there and became a traditional priestess. Her house was built originally for a wealthy African merchant. She has turned it into part workshop, part hostel for visiting worshippers, part temple, and part art gallery. In front of it, she and her helpers have built fences of concrete figures, dancers and musicians in a Yoruba carnival. On the balconies above, her pet monkeys play.
I'm not a studio artist. I'm all the time deeply involved into my surrounding. I always was. Vienna, Paris, everywhere. I got involved into the human context. And that is what happened here at once, I saw. And this is what was surprising people, because they are sympathetic Europeans, but they do not step out very far from their cars and reservations. And if somebody steps out, it is an anthropologist. I'm not an anthropologist. I am living that life.
As she became more and more involved in Yoruba religion, she brought her own artistic skills increasingly to its service. First restoring the old shrines, and then building totally new ones on ancient sacred sites.
I wanted to make sure that the architecture blends into the surrounding, with the trees and so on. But I was then still a bit embarrassed. It was the beginning. And I was sitting there for 3 months, every day a bit, longer or shorter time, and more or less not doing more than to look into the branches of these enormous trees and somehow begging them to transmit their aesthetic laws to me. And then I started to call Adebisi, my assistant, and as I used to speak with my hands very much, even more now since I have to do it to explain myself. We are working without plans, naturally. I started to make him sit with me, and I showed him which parts of the branches I think are most expressive, and that we have to make these 3 doors with the gates. And I was telling him how it has to look, and that it has to be these 2 serpents and why and so on. And this is how we still work. You know, I have the idea, I'm cooking out the idea till I have the feeling this is how it has to be, and this is how I always knew it has to be. And then I start to tell him.
Work is unceasing. Historic sites are being marked with ever more complex sculptures. This one represents the chameleon which appeared at the dawn of creation and gingerly stepped down onto the newly made earth to see if it was cool enough for the gods to walk upon. There are many, both in Africa and Europe, who regard these new shrines as desecrations. The sites are, after all, historic and sacred to the Yoruba, and there is a living artistic tradition flourishing all over Yoruba land that has produced some of the most splendid and noble sculptures in all Africa. Why should that be abandoned in favour of a new style influenced by cultures from far away? Suzanne Wenger's view is that continuity of tradition is less important than religious commitment, and that she certainly has.
This is the place for Egbe. That is the Heavenly Society. Every section of the shrine is for a certain section of the religion. Egbe is the Heavenly Society. It is the other parts of your soul which are not in the moment living on earth. Florid forms, that's flower, that are flowers, but also seeds. That is now the story house. That are the steps, and is supported with the tree. The inside is tree. You will see it then there. But it's also like a snail, because the snail is the symbol of beginning, like DNA, you know. We are entering now the womb of creation. So it is also the basis of the tree of derivation, which you see now here. That is the tree of life, the middle, who supports this building. And it is a living room, but it is a living room for the gods. The only people who impersonate the gods can live here unharmed and happily. So that is a bed and a cupboard and that windows to look out. Everything under the shadow.
And who does come and stay here? Do you stay here ever?
Oh yes, I do.
For how
It
long?
is it is just as I like. You know, there's no any obligations.
To some European eyes, Suzanne Wenger's strange amalgam of Western styles and African myths may seem to be without meaning or value. But she seeks no golden opinions from the art critics of the West. For her, the crucial test is whether what she creates is effective and meaningful in the African community that has now absorbed her. The fact that her shrines have become places where Yoruba people worship in increasing numbers is the measure of success that she values most highly. For Suzanne Wenger and the Yoruba, the driving force of art is religion. A great drummer is fine because he speaks with the voice of the gods. A sculptor carves well because he has a true vision of the divinity. And in that they're at one with tribal communities all over the world. People of the West, having imposed their ways of life on so much of the rest of humanity, now find their old faiths dying. Perhaps that is one reason why they find the fervent images created by tribal artists so compelling. For it's through them that they can still glimpse other faiths, other worlds, other ways of being human.